The studio was thick with tension as the liberal TV host's voice cut sharply through the room, demanding, "Take it off!" It wasn't a question, nor was it a casual remark. It was a direct order, one designed to humiliate, to strip away something deeply personal, something sacred. All eyes turned to Karoline Leavitt, the young, unapologetically faithful leader standing at the center of the crowded room in the aftermath of her press conference. The object of the host's contempt? A simple yet gleaming necklace resting against her collarbone, a small but powerful symbol of her faith, her belief in God, and, as some would later say, her unshakable courage. But this was about more than just jewelry. This was a moment, a confrontation meant to test her resolve, to push her into submission under the bright glare of studio lights and the silent, watchful gaze of millions tuning in. The host, emboldened by his position, by the safety of a stage that had long favored his side of the ideological spectrum, saw this as his opportunity to dismantle her. Karoline, however, saw something else entirely. She had faced opposition before, from college classrooms where she had been the lone voice defending traditional values, to debates where her opponents sought to undermine her rather than engage in real discussion. She had learned how to stand firm in the storm. This moment was no different. The demand, sharp and laced with condescension, hung in the air, making even those who might have agreed with the host's worldview shift uncomfortably in their seats. There was something unsettling about the way he had said it, the sheer force behind the words, as though a belief could simply be discarded like an accessory. "Take it off," he repeated, his voice louder this time, as if daring her to refuse. Karoline did not flinch. She did not glance at the cameras, nor did she seek reassurance from the faces in the crowd. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable, and then, in a moment of quiet defiance, she offered the faintest, most disarming smile. She knew what this was. It wasn't a debate about policy. It wasn't about political ideology. It was an attempt to make her shrink, to make her apologize for something she had no reason to apologize for, and so she chose her words carefully, deliberately. "You want me to take it off?" she asked, her voice unwavering. "My faith? Because that's what this necklace represents. My faith, my relationship with God, my strength. And you're asking me to remove it because you disagree with it?" The room, already tense, fell into an even deeper silence. Even the host, who had entered the exchange with the smug confidence of a man who expected easy compliance, hesitated for just a fraction of a second. This was not the reaction he had planned for. He had expected defensiveness, maybe even outrage. Instead, Karoline had turned his challenge into a question of its own, one that placed the burden back on him. What was it, really, that he found offensive? Was it the necklace itself, or was it something far more fundamental? What it stood for, what it meant? She continued, her tone calm, measured, but carrying a strength that could not be ignored. "Are you really angry about a piece of jewelry?" she asked, her fingers gently holding the cross between them. "Or are you angry about what it represents? Because if my faith offends you, I have to wonder, why?" The shift in the air was almost tangible. Suddenly this wasn't just about her. It was about everyone in the room who had ever felt pressured to hide their beliefs, who had ever been made to feel that their convictions were unwelcome in certain spaces. It was about the silent battles fought every day by people who simply wanted to live by their principles without being shamed for them. Even those who had come into the room with no particular stake in the exchange could feel it, the weight of a challenge that had, in an instant, been flipped on its head. The host, still seated across from her, suddenly found himself in an unfamiliar position. He had expected control. He had expected submission. What he had not expected was resistance. Not the loud, angry kind that could be dismissed as reactionary, but the quiet, unwavering kind that could not be ignored. Cameras flashed, pens scribbled across notepads. The moment had become something bigger than anyone had anticipated. Yet Karoline remained poised. She did not gloat. She did not meet hostility with hostility. Instead, she embodied something far more powerful: grace under fire. Her words, spoken not in anger but in conviction, had turned what was meant to be a moment of humiliation into a moment of undeniable truth. She knew, as did everyone watching, that the real issue was never the necklace. It was what it symbolized, and in that moment, by refusing to bend, she had already won. The room was silent, yet the tension crackled in the air like a storm waiting to break. Karoline Leavitt had just been challenged in one of the most public and humiliating ways possible, ordered, to remove her necklace, a small but profound symbol of her faith. A lesser person might have wavered, might have hesitated under the sheer force of that moment. But Karoline was not like most people. She had spent her entire life preparing for moments exactly like this. Moments where her beliefs would be tested, where standing firm would cost her something, where the easiest path would be to comply, to back down, to simply let it go for the sake of convenience. But she had learned long ago that faith, true faith, is not something that bends in the face of adversity. It is something that holds steady, that anchors a person when the world around them tries to pull them in every direction. Karoline's expression didn't change, except for the faintest glint in her eyes. Something unshaken, something resolute. She could feel the weight of the cameras trained on her, the expectant gazes of those in the audience, waiting to see how she would react. Would she fold under the pressure? Would she take off the necklace, proving that even the strongest convictions could be eroded with enough ridicule? Or would she lash out, meeting hostility with hostility, allowing her opponent to paint her as reactionary, irrational? But Karoline had learned long ago that power does not come from volume, it comes from certainty. It comes from knowing exactly who you are, even when others try to tell you otherwise. And so she did not raise her voice, nor did she rush to defend herself. Instead, she let a brief silence linger before speaking, ensuring that her words carried the weight they deserved. "You want me to take it off?" she asked, her voice calm, controlled. There was no defensiveness in her tone, no anger, only quiet, unshakable confidence. "You want me to remove a symbol of my faith, something that represents my relationship with God, my strength, my convictions, because you disagree with it?" Her words were deliberate, and they landed with precision, reframing the entire exchange. Suddenly, this wasn't about a necklace. It was about something much deeper. It was about what it meant to have faith in a world that increasingly demanded its erasure from public life. It was about the line between respecting different beliefs and silencing them. It was about whether a person should be made to apologize for who they are, simply because others are uncomfortable with it. The host had expected resistance, but he had not expected this. A challenge that wasn't combative but reflective, one that forced him to confront his own intentions. He had wanted to expose Karoline as extreme, to paint her as someone forcing her beliefs onto others. But in that moment, it became clear to everyone watching that the only person trying to impose their worldview was him. Yet, Karoline wasn't finished. She reached up, gently holding the cross pendant between her fingers, her gaze steady. "Are you really offended by a piece of jewelry?" she continued. "Or are you offended by what it represents? Because if my faith bothers you this much, I have to wonder, why?" The shift in the room was undeniable. People who had initially watched the exchange with skepticism now leaned forward, drawn into the weight of her words. Some who might have agreed with the host initially now seemed hesitant, as though realizing that perhaps this wasn't about a necklace at all. Perhaps it was about something far more dangerous, an attempt to make faith a thing to be hidden, something to be removed, something to be discarded under the guise of tolerance. But Karoline was not about to apologize for her beliefs. She was not about to make herself smaller to make others comfortable. "This necklace," she continued, her voice steady, "is not just an accessory. It is a reminder of the strength I have found in my darkest hours, when nothing else could bring me peace. A reminder of the values I strive to live by. Love, kindness, and the unwavering belief that every single person around me has inherent worth, regardless of whether they share my faith or not." The audience, once so still, began to shift. There were murmurs, nods of understanding, and even among those who did not share her beliefs, there was something undeniable about her words. She wasn't asking for agreement. She wasn't demanding that others believe as she did. She was simply stating, with clarity and conviction, that her faith was hers to keep and that no one had the right to take it from her. Even the host, who had begun this exchange with nothing but confidence in his ability to control the conversation, seemed momentarily unsure of himself. He had been prepared for a fight, for an argument he could dominate. But Karoline had given him neither. Instead, she had handed him something far more difficult to counter: grace, truth, and the simple but powerful act of standing firm in what she believed. The cameras flashed, the energy in the room thick with something unspoken yet deeply felt. "You said I should take it off," she said finally, her gaze never leaving the hosts. "As though my faith is something I can remove as easily as you think. But my faith isn't a decoration. It's not something I put on in the morning and leave behind at night. It is who I am. It informs every choice I make, every policy I advocate for, every interaction I have, and I say this knowing full well that not everyone believes the same. And that's okay." Her words were no longer just for the host. They were for every person who had ever felt attacked, silenced, or shamed for what they believed. They were for the ones who had been told to keep their faith quiet, to make themselves smaller, to apologize for holding convictions that did not align with the ever-changing tide of public opinion. "I wear this," she finished, her voice filled not with defiance but with certainty, "not because I think my faith makes me better than anyone else, but because it reminds me to be better. Better than I was yesterday. Better to my friends and family. Better to strangers who may need kindness more than I realize. That is what my faith symbolizes. And if that offends you, then maybe it's not my necklace that's the issue. Maybe it's something only you can reconcile." The host opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He looked at Karoline, then at the cameras, then back at the necklace she still held between her fingers, as though realizing for the first time that he had not walked her into a trap, he had walked himself into one. Karoline had not just refused to back down, she had done something far more powerful. She had turned the attack into an undeniable moment of truth, not just for herself, but for everyone watching, and in doing so, she had already won. Karoline Leavitt was never meant to blend in. From an early age, she understood that standing firm in her beliefs would make her a target, but she never once considered compromising her faith for the sake of fitting in. She was not born into privilege, nor did she inherit a legacy of political power. Instead, she grew up in a modest, hard-working family where faith wasn't just something spoken about on Sundays, it was woven into the very fabric of their daily lives. Her parents, devout in their belief in God, instilled in her the idea that faith was not about grand gestures or loud declarations, but about living with conviction, even when no one else was watching. Her mother often told her, "Faith is not about shouting louder than others. It's about standing firm when the world tells you to sit down." Karoline carried these words with her, allowing them to shape her character, her choices, and ultimately her path as a leader. In school, she was the student who didn't shy away from difficult conversations. When classroom discussions turned to topics that challenged her beliefs, she did not shrink into silence. Instead, she engaged with a quiet but unyielding strength, never seeking to force her views onto others, but never allowing hers to be dismissed either. In high school, she was often the lone voice advocating for the values she held dear, and though it would have been easier to remain quiet, she never wavered. She learned early on that conviction often comes at a cost, that standing for something meant being willing to stand alone. Yet, with every challenge, with every debate where she was told she was on the wrong side of history, she only grew stronger. By the time she reached college, she was no stranger to opposition. Universities, often seen as bastions of progressive thought, were places where traditional values were not just debated, but openly ridiculed. But Karoline had spent her entire life preparing for such an environment. She walked into classrooms where professors dismissed faith as outdated, and where students scoffed at the idea of morality being rooted in religion. Yet she remained steadfast. She knew that the true test of faith wasn't in how loudly one could argue for it, but in how one lived it. She didn't lash out at those who belittled her beliefs. Instead, she embodied them. She treated even her harshest critics with kindness, proving through her actions that faith wasn't about judgment or exclusion. It was about unwavering principles that guided her every step. Her journey into leadership was not one she had initially planned, but rather one she had been called into. She saw how easily people who shared her beliefs were silenced, how quickly those who dared to defend faith, family, and freedom were dismissed. And so she chose to step forward. She became a voice for those who felt voiceless, an advocate for those who had been told their values no longer mattered. She understood that the world was changing, that the culture was shifting in a way that sought to erase the very foundation upon which America had been built. But instead of lamenting that change, she embraced her role in pushing back against it. When she stood in that press conference, facing down a man who demanded that she strip away her beliefs in front of a national audience, she was not afraid. She had spent a lifetime preparing for that moment. She had stood in classrooms, in auditoriums, in debate halls where she had been outnumbered but never outmatched. She had learned that courage was not about the absence of fear, but about standing firm despite it. She had come to understand that faith was not something that could be removed as easily as a necklace, because faith was not something external. It was something that lived inside her, something that shaped every decision she made, every policy she stood for, and every conversation she had. Karoline Leavitt was never meant to blend in because leaders do not blend in, they stand out. And as she held that necklace between her fingers, staring into the face of someone who wanted her to apologize for who she was, she knew with absolute certainty that she never would. The confrontation should have ended quickly. The liberal TV host had made his demand, expecting Karoline Leavitt to either comply or react with the kind of anger that would give him ammunition to discredit her. Either way, he believed he had the upper hand. What he did not anticipate, however, was her ability to turn his attack into something far more powerful. A teaching moment that transcended their exchange and became a statement about faith, conviction, and the fundamental right to express one's beliefs without fear. Instead of crumbling under pressure or meeting aggression with aggression, Karoline chose a different path. She recognized that this was not merely a personal attack, but a broader attempt to make an example out of her, to send a message to anyone watching that faith had no place in public life, that those who dared to wear their beliefs openly would be met with ridicule and scorn. And yet, she did not flinch. Instead, she did something far more profound. She held up a mirror, forcing not just the host but everyone in the room and beyond to confront what was truly happening. She began with a simple question, one that immediately shifted the weight of the conversation. "You want me to take it off?" she asked, her voice calm, steady. "My faith? My convictions? Because that's what this represents." There was no anger in her words, no defensiveness, only quiet certainty. By refusing to respond with outrage, she denied the host the reaction he was seeking. More importantly, she reframed the moment, making it clear that the issue was not about a piece of jewelry, but about something far deeper. "I wonder," she continued, holding the necklace between her fingers, "why does this offend you so much? Are you truly upset about a symbol? Or about what it stands for?" Her words landed like a challenge, not in the form of an attack, but as an invitation for reflection. The host, who had walked into this exchange with the confidence of a man who believed himself to be in control, suddenly found himself on the defensive. He shifted in his seat, his carefully planned line of attack momentarily stalled. He had expected defiance, had prepared for the kind of heated back and forth that would allow him to paint her as irrational or extreme. Instead, she had done something far more difficult to counter. She had remained composed, refusing to engage on his terms, and in doing so she had forced him to question his own motives. The energy in the room shifted. The audience, which had been prepared for another routine media takedown of a conservative figure, was suddenly engaged in something else entirely. There was a pause, a moment of collective realization as people considered the implications of what was happening. Karoline continued, her voice unwavering. "This necklace," she said, lifting it slightly so that it caught the light, "is not a political statement. It is not a demand that anyone else believe as I do. It is a reminder, a deeply personal one, of the strength I have found in my darkest moments. When nothing else brought me peace, when no human words could offer comfort, my faith sustained me. And that is what you are asking me to remove, not metal and chain, but meaning and purpose. And I have to ask," the weight of her question hung in the air, impossible to ignore. This was no longer about her. It was about the countless others who had been pressured, subtly or overtly, to hide their faith, to keep their beliefs silent for fear of offending the sensibilities of others. It was about a growing culture that demanded tolerance for every viewpoint except those rooted in tradition, in faith, in principles that had guided humanity for generations. Even those who might have agreed with the host's ideological stance could not ignore the truth in her words. She was not demanding that anyone else believe as she did. She was not using her faith as a weapon. She was simply stating with absolute clarity that she had the right to live by her beliefs just as much as anyone else had the right to reject them. You see, she continued, looking directly at the host now, I don't wear this necklace to force my beliefs onto anyone else. God gives every person free will, the choice to believe or not to believe, to follow or to walk away. I respect that choice. But I wear this because it reminds me of something no one else can see. It reminds me of how far I've come, of the battles I've fought, of the strength I've gained, not by my own doing, but through God's grace. The room was still, the kind of stillness that only comes when people are confronted with something undeniably true. Even the host, who had been so eager to challenge her, seemed at a loss for words. He had set out to expose her, to embarrass her, to reduce her faith to something that could be dismissed or ridiculed. Instead, she had exposed something in him, the impulse to silence rather than engage, the instinct to demand compliance rather than offer respect. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment, every expression, every shift in energy, as the reality of what was happening sank in. Karoline knew she had made her point, but she had one final message, not just for the host, but for everyone watching. You told me to take it off, as if faith is something that can be removed as easily as a necklace, she said, her voice steady but resolute. But faith is not an accessory. It is not something I put on in the morning and take off at night. It is who I am. It informs the way I live, the way I lead, the way I treat others. And I say this knowing full well that not everyone believes as I do. And that's okay. She glanced around the room now, taking in every face, ensuring that her words reached not just the host, but the audience, the viewers at home, and anyone who had ever felt pressured to hide their convictions. Because unity is not about making everyone the same. It is about respecting the differences that make us who we are. And if we truly believe in freedom, that freedom must extend to everyone, including those who live by faith. The host opened his mouth, but no words came. He looked at her, then at the cameras, then at the necklace still resting against her collarbone, as though realizing too late that he had not only lost control of the conversation, but had lost something greater, the moral high ground. The moment had shifted. What had begun as an attempt to shame Karoline Leavitt had become something else entirely. It had become a statement about faith, about resilience, about the right to believe without fear. And as the audience erupted into applause, it was clear that this moment was no longer just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been told to hide their faith. And in that moment, she had given them permission to stand tall. The moment had slipped from his grasp, and the TV host knew it. What was supposed to be a calculated takedown, a public humiliation of a young, outspoken leader, had instead turned into something entirely different. Karoline Leavitt had not just resisted his attempt to silence her, she had turned the moment into a powerful statement about faith, conviction, and the right to express one's beliefs without fear. She had not raised her voice, had not resorted to anger or outrage, yet somehow she had completely flipped the dynamic. The energy in the studio had shifted. The audience, which at the beginning of the exchange had been prepared for yet another routine media-driven confrontation, was now seeing something far more profound unfold before them. A hush had settled over the room, and in that silence, the weight of the moment became undeniable. The host, who had started the conversation with confidence and control, now found himself fumbling. His usual sharp-witted comebacks, his ability to steer an interview to his advantage, had abandoned him. He opened his mouth, attempting to regain the upper hand, but there was nothing left to say. Karoline had already said everything that needed to be said, and she had done so with a level of grace that left no room for rebuttal. He glanced at his notes, searching for a way to pivot, to salvage what remained of his intended narrative, but the pages in front of him suddenly felt useless. Every argument he had prepared, every point he had planned to make, had been dismantled before he even had the chance to fully present it. And worse still, he could feel the shift in the room, not just from the audience, but from the production crew, the cameras, even the people in the control room who were watching the broadcast unfold in real time. This was no longer the ambush he had intended. It was something far greater, something he could not control. The audience, previously neutral or uncertain, now saw the situation for what it was. They had witnessed a woman stand firm in her beliefs without once trying to impose them on others. They had watched as she faced hostility with dignity, as she answered an attempt at public humiliation with a response so thoughtful, so measured, that it had left the aggressor speechless. And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the tide turned. It began with murmurs of agreement, a few scattered nods from audience members who had entered the room without any particular stake in the conversation, but now found themselves moved by Karoline's words. Then, as her final statement lingered in the air, the first sound of applause broke out. It wasn't just polite applause, the kind that is offered out of obligation. It was something real, something spontaneous, something that came from a place of deep respect, and then it grew. One by one, more people joined in, the clapping becoming louder, more certain, until the studio was filled with the unmistakable sound of an audience that had just witnessed something extraordinary. Even some of the production crew, typically trained to remain neutral, found themselves nodding in silent acknowledgement of what had transpired. The moment had transcended politics, transcended ideology. It had become about something deeper, something fundamental. It was about the right to believe, the right to stand firm, the right to refuse to be shamed into silence. And in that moment, it was clear to everyone in the room who had truly won this exchange. The host, now visibly unsettled, forced a small, tight-lipped smile, as if trying to maintain some semblance of composure. He cleared his throat, adjusted his tie, and attempted to move on. "Well, I think we're about out of time," he muttered, his voice lacking the usual authority he carried in such moments. It was a quiet admission of defeat, an acknowledgement that he had lost control of the conversation and, more importantly, the audience. Karoline, still composed, still unwavering, simply offered him a polite nod, as if to say that no further words were necessary. She had made her point, and no amount of backpedaling or redirection could change that. As the applause continued, Karoline stood, adjusting the very necklace she had been told to remove, ensuring it remained exactly where it belonged. She did not gloat, did not bask in her victory, because this moment had never been about winning an argument. It had been about something far greater. She turned to face the cameras one last time, offering a sincere, unwavering expression that spoke louder than any final statement could. She had not just defended herself, she had defended countless others who had ever felt pressured to hide their faith, who had ever been made to feel that their beliefs were something to be ashamed of. The broadcast ended, but the conversation was far from over. Within minutes, the clip of the exchange began circulating online, spreading faster than even the producers could have anticipated. Social media platforms erupted with reactions, some praising her courage, others acknowledging the power of her words, and even those who disagreed with her views found themselves unable to deny the dignity with which she had handled the moment. The very attempt to humiliate her had only elevated her, cementing her reputation as a leader who could stand unshaken even under the harshest scrutiny. Meanwhile, the host, now painfully aware of how the exchange had played out, retreated backstage, his confidence shaken. He had walked into the interview believing he could control the narrative, believing he could frame Karoline as rigid, outdated, or even hypocritical. Instead, he had been confronted with something undeniable: truth spoken without fear, faith held without apology, and conviction so strong that not even the weight of public pressure could break it. And as the applause continued to echo in his mind, he realized that in his attempt to force her into submission, he had only revealed his own bias for the world to see. The moment in that studio was more than just an exchange between a TV host and Karoline Leavitt. It became a symbol of something much greater. It was not just about a necklace or a single confrontation. It was about the broader conversation happening across the country, one that millions of people could relate to. It was about faith in the public square, about resilience in the face of pressure, and about the right to stand firm in one's beliefs, even when the world demands conformity. Karoline's refusal to back down was not an act of defiance. It was a declaration of something fundamental. that faith is not something that can be dictated by cultural trends or silenced by social pressure. It is something deeply personal, something that shapes identity, purpose, and moral conviction. Her response was not just for herself. It was for every person who had ever felt they had to hide their faith to be accepted, every individual who had been told that their beliefs no longer had a place in modern society. In a world that increasingly demands that people compromise their values for the sake of inclusion, Karoline's words served as a reminder that true inclusion must be rooted in respect for all perspectives, not just the ones that fit within the prevailing narrative. Tolerance, as it is so often preached, cannot be one-sided. If people are asked to accept different lifestyles, different worldviews, and different belief systems, then that same courtesy must extend to those who hold traditional values, to those who live by their faith, to those who refuse to compromise the very principles that guide their lives. Her moment on that stage exposed a troubling reality. While society claims to celebrate diversity, it often does so selectively, embracing only the beliefs that align with popular opinion, while marginalizing those that do not. But true diversity is not about forcing uniformity. It is about allowing people to live authentically, even when their values challenge the status quo. Karoline's resilience was not about proving a political point or winning an argument. It was about something far deeper, the quiet but powerful strength of a person who knows who they are and refuses to be ashamed of it. She showed that faith is not about imposing beliefs on others, but about holding firm to them for oneself. She demonstrated that grace and conviction are not mutually exclusive, that one can stand unwavering in belief while still treating others with respect and dignity. And perhaps most importantly, she proved that courage is not always about fighting. It is sometimes about simply refusing to be moved. As the footage of that moment spread, it became clear that Karoline had not just defended her own right to express her faith, she had given voice to millions who had felt silenced. Her stand was a reminder that faith, no matter how unpopular it may become in certain circles, is not something to be hidden. It is something to be lived, something to be cherished, and most of all, something that no one should ever be made to apologize for. The impact of Karoline Leavitt's moment on that stage did not fade when the cameras turned off. It did not disappear when the TV host shifted uncomfortably in his chair, searching for a way to salvage his failed attempt to humiliate her. Instead, it ignited something much larger, a ripple effect that extended far beyond the walls of that studio. What began as a routine media attack on a conservative woman of faith became a defining cultural moment, a statement on courage, conviction, and the growing divide between those who seek to erase expressions of belief and those who refuse to apologize for them. Karoline's response was not just about defending herself. It was about defending the right of millions of Americans to openly live out their faith, without fear of ridicule or exclusion. She had not raised her voice, had not met hostility with hostility, and yet she had completely reframed the conversation, leaving the host speechless and the audience in awe. As the footage of the exchange spread, it took on a life of its own. Clips circulated across social media, shared by people of all backgrounds, some who admired her for standing firm, others who respected her composure even if they did not share her beliefs. Political commentators debated the significance of the moment, with some calling it a turning point in the cultural conversation about faith in America. News outlets dissected her words, analyzing how she had managed to take what was meant to be an attack and turn it into one of the most powerful defenses of religious expression in recent memory. But beyond the headlines and commentary, something even more meaningful was happening. Ordinary people, students, workers, parents, church leaders, were inspired by her strength. Some shared stories of how they, too, had faced similar pressures to downplay or hide their faith. The others spoke of how they had remained silent in the past when confronted with hostility toward their beliefs, but after seeing Karoline stand firm, they felt emboldened to do the same. For young professionals navigating workplaces where religious expression is often unwelcome, her words served as a reminder that faith is not something to be compartmentalized or hidden. For college students, many of whom find themselves in classrooms where traditional values are openly mocked, she became proof that one does not have to choose between faith and respectability. Even among those who had been hesitant to express their beliefs publicly, There was a newfound confidence, a realization that they were not alone, and that standing firm in their convictions did not mean standing alone. Karoline herself remained remarkably unchanged by the attention. She had not spoken those words for applause, nor had she responded with composure for the sake of political gain. She had done it because it was the right thing to do, because she understood that faith, if it is real, must be lived out openly, not just in private moments of prayer, but in the face of public scrutiny. She had long known that conviction comes with a cost, that the world often demands silence from those who hold to unshakable truths. But she had also learned that true strength is found in refusing to bend. And in that moment, standing on that stage, she had not just defended herself, she had given a voice to countless others who had ever been told to hide what they believed. The TV host, on the other hand, had not anticipated the weight of what had transpired. His plan had been simple: corner Karoline, make her flustered, force her into a defensive position. Instead, he had been left fumbling for words, confronted with something he could not dismiss: grace, confidence, and the undeniable power of a woman who refused to be shamed. He had expected an argument. He had not expected a lesson. And as the interview ended and he sat in the silence of his own failed ambush, he was left with a reality he could not change. Karoline Leavitt had won, not just in that room, but in the hearts of millions who had seen the exchange, and found themselves reminded of the power of unwavering conviction. In the days and weeks that followed, the moment remained a point of discussion, not just in political circles, but in churches, homes, and conversations across the country. People did not just see a woman standing up for herself. They saw a reflection of their own battles, their own quiet struggles to remain true to their values, in a world that often tells them to let go. Karoline's words became more than a response to one man's challenge. They became a rallying cry for those who had ever felt pressured to compromise. And in the end, that was the true victory. Not applause, not media attention, but the awakening of a movement of people who would no longer be silent. Karoline Leavitt's story is more than just a moment of public confrontation. It is a powerful lesson on faith, resilience, and the importance of standing firm in one's beliefs, no matter the opposition. For many older Americans, this lesson is particularly resonant because they have lived through times of great societal change, where values that were once foundational are now often questioned or dismissed. Her story is a reminder that true conviction does not waver under pressure, and that faith, when deeply held, is not something to be hidden for the sake of approval. Too often the world demands that people compromise, that they silence parts of themselves to fit into shifting cultural expectations. But as Karoline demonstrated, strength is not about fighting back with hostility. It is about holding firm with dignity, grace, and quiet confidence. This lesson is especially relevant in today's world, where it is easy to feel that traditional values are under attack, that morality is being redefined, and that faith is being pushed out of the public sphere. But Karoline's response shows that the answer is not to retreat or to become bitter. It is to live out one's beliefs boldly yet respectfully, to be unafraid to speak the truth while still treating others with kindness. Her moment on that stage was not about forcing others to believe as she did. It was about refusing to apologize for what she knew to be true. This is a message that applies to everyone, particularly those who have spent a lifetime building their lives on principles of faith, family, and integrity. In the end, the lesson is clear. Staying true to one's values is not about winning arguments. It is about living with authenticity, knowing that strength comes not from how loudly one speaks, but from how steadfastly one stands.